Hi, everybody. So I want to talk today about, this is kind of a precursor to a live that I'm going to be doing next week with Indigo Angel. That's going to happen on Monday, and I encourage you to show up for that and bring your questions because we're doing a retreat here together in Pensacola in September, and it's a really important retreat. It's mission based. We're going to be doing something really important there. And I want to talk about the work that we're going to be doing and why, and how you can participate not only in the retreat, but how you can do this kind of work on your own just by knowing about it. So next week we're going to talk about the Starfort Lyran Gridwork Activation Retreat that she's leading, and I'm going to be there as a team member, and I'll be participating alongside the participants, and leading some things as well myself. I could have just announced that and left it there. I don't want to do that because if you come into next week's conversation, the one that we're doing with Indy, without any ground under you, if this is not familiar to you, then a lot of what we say might sound like language from another planet or another dimension. Grids, nodes, stargates, reversal grids, activation, all of that stuff. So today I want to lay the ground. Because a lot of this has been new language for me too, it's really helpful to learn this language, or I can say it's been helpful for me to learn this language because it's given words to intuitive senses and knowings that I've had without really being able to talk about them. So today I want to lay the ground. I want to talk about the lines, what they actually are, what's been done to them, and the part that I care about most, which is what can be done now, what can always be done. So here's where I'm going to land, and I'll tell you now so that you can hold this the whole way through. This is a story about restoration and reclamation. The ley lines, yes, they've been hijacked. Anybody who's a grid worker knows that. Anybody with sensitivity to those lines knows that. But most people don't realize what these lines are, how they've been hijacked, and what we can do to turn them back, to reverse the inversion of their flow. And the turning happens through us. It happens through human beings. This is a really beautiful, beautiful thing. It happens through us. That's what I'm always saying, that New Earth happens through us. It does happen through us, right? That's the whole point. Everything happens through us. That's why we're here. So look, the Earth has a body, right? Just, from a simple and physical material standpoint, we can acknowledge that. We don't have to go cosmic to understand that. Every living body has channels, right? We have channels. Our blood moves through our veins. Sap moves through a tree. In Chinese medicine, the body has meridians, right? And the whole practice rests on the observation that energy moves along particular pathways. That's what it does. And that our health depends on that movement being unobstructed. Health in general depends on movement being unobstructed. So if we hold that same idea at a planetary scale, if Earth is a living being, which of course she is, a living sentient being, a planetary being, then she has channels too, obviously. Lines of current that are running through her, that are running through her body, and places where those lines can cross, and the charge in those lines, because there's energy running through those lines, then the charge gets concentrated at the points where those lines cross, and we call those nodes. And there are, nodes where you've got two lines, there are nodes where you've got more than two lines, and the more lines pass through a point together, the more concentrated the charge is, right? It makes sense. Those are the places that feel different when you stand on them, and you've felt this, even if you never had a name for it, right? Power spots. In Sedona, there's all these power spots, in England, there's all these power spots all over the planet, right? So these are the nodes and the places where these lines come together. Different cultures found these lines. They were aware of these lines, and they named them differently. In China, they call them the dragon lines, right? There's the whole practice of feng shui grew up around reading those lines. In Britain, there's the old straight track, that was published in 1925, and Watkins, he's the one who called them ley lines, and he thought actually that they were old trade routes. He wasn't making an energetic claim, but that was when they were sort of mapped out, and the energetic reading came later. When in 1969, when obviously people always knew this, but I'm talking about published works where people, actually said this. There was a book that called The View Over Atlantis, and that's when the author connected the ley lines to earth current and to the Chinese dragon lines. That's where most of the modern conversation actually begins. So, in England, there's the Michael and Mary lines. A lot of people are familiar with those lines in England, and you can go and walk those lines today. People do. So I want to ground what we're talking about physically. We are not separate instruments from the ley lines, the power lines in the Earth's body that go over the Earth. Our bodies were built to read the field, okay? I mean, we know that measurable alpha wave responses happen in the human brain in response to geomagnetic shifts. Even if you have no conscious awareness that anything is shifting geomagnetically, your brain is registering it anyway, right? The human nervous system is picking up geomagnetic information below the threshold of conscious awareness all the time, continuously. Right now, as you're listening to this, it's happening. So we are wired into the field, whether or not we're aware of it. You are wired into the field, whether or not you've ever heard of ley lines or whether or not you give that kind of thing any credence. So this matters enormously for where we're going today. If we were built to read the grid, then we're also built to participate in it. So, hold that. The word that I keep coming back to is song lines. And I remember when, George Kavasilis made a really important differentiation between song lines and ley lines in original Australia. I won't call it Aboriginal because ab means not. So when you say Aboriginal, you're saying not original, which is crazy because they are the original people. Just like another inversion, right? Word spells and word magic that you don't know you're even using. So in original Australia, the Origines, the song lines are, this is so amazing to me. The song lines are the paths that the creation ancestors walked and the country that they made as they walked, right? Creation is sung into being in the organic, natural way of life, okay? So it's not about, it isn't made from math and numbers. It isn't made from geometry. That is the overlay. That is empire, right? Creation is actually sung into being organically, right? It's a weft. And every feature of the land, go back to the Origines in Australia, the creation ancestors, right? Every feature of the land along the path of songline creation has a verse. And the song itself is the map. So you can navigate hundreds of miles of country by singing it in the right sequence. And the melodic shape of the song follows the shape of the land itself. I mean, this is like the most important structural fact in this entire transmission. In our original natural way, we are working at that level. We are working at the creational level, right? The song line required a human being to walk it and to sing it. The song has to be carried. It has to be sung by someone with the right relationship to that country, with, at the right time, in the right sequence. If the singing stops, the line doesn't disappear, but the relationship does. And the relationship is the whole point. Originally, organically, we natural human beings, before interference, we are in a creational, we are in relationship with creation. We are living and operating on a creational level. That is the real life. And so the song lines are a demonstration of that creational relationship that we can have with our mother planet, right? A sentient being. So, and it tells us something about how this whole architecture of inversion was designed too, right? The lines of creation were never meant to run on their own like plumbing. They were meant to be tended in reciprocal relationship with the human beings living on them. And, the earth gives and the people give back, and the current stays clean and moving in the creational way of life. So I want to say this plainly. We were meant to be the maintenance system of those original song lines. That was our job here, and the job was relationship on a creational level. That's who we are meant to be, which means, and I want you to feel where this is, where I'm going with this, is that the grid, the grid that we're talking about now, cannot be fully restored without us either. It has to happen through us. So, what inversion actually means? When I say that the lines were hijacked, and I said that the lines were hijacked, people often hear that as destruction but the difference between destruction and what actually was done really matters a great deal. You don't destroy an energy system that runs a planet because you need it. You'd have nothing left to feed on, and that's what this parasitical consciousness does. It feeds. Okay? So you don't destroy an energy system that runs a planet. What you do instead is far more elegant, far more sinister, far more parasitic. You reverse the energy of the flow. So that's what has been done. A line running in its original orientation circulates. It carries the current from the land to the people, from the people back to the land, and then, outward into the wider field. Everything in the loop gets nourished. That's how things are in the natural way of life. If you invert the energy in the line and the same architecture is there, but it's running backwards, the current is still moving, the line is still live, if you will, like an electrical wire live. But what has changed is that now it's drawing inward and upward towards a point of collection instead of circulating outward, circulating to the people who need it. So what was reciprocity becomes extraction. And so it's the same road, but the traffic has been diverted into it goes into the opposite, right? This is exactly the harvesting system that we've been subjected to for millennia on the planetary level, and how it works in the grids and why the grids are so important. And this is why also the inversion has been so hard for people to detect, because the signal is still there. The power sites are still powerful. You can stand in one of these places and feel enormous things if you're sensitive, and you can feel a charge. You can read that charge as something sacred. But when what you're actually feeling is a functioning siphon, a siphon. This was like a revelation for me. So let's talk about how this was done mechanically. Okay. So first, and I'm speaking of empire. Okay. I'm speaking of the parasitical consciousness of inversion that manifests through every system on the planet. Okay. But what this consciousness does, and you can apply this to any this mechanism to any inversion process that has happened on the planet. Okay, first they capture the node, right? So they take the crossing points, the springs, the hills, the wells, the standing places, and build on top of them. Okay, capture the node. Then they overwrite the ceremony. So that's replacing the reciprocal right, the natural way, with a right of submission of some kind, right? Same location, opposite direction. Then they install repetition, right? Because we all know that repetition is what holds a pattern in place. So weekly, seasonally, generationally, right? The repetition of our social and cultural rights. Mm-hmm. Then they harvest the emotion, right? The grief, the fear, the guilt, the awe, the worshipfulness, directed outward and upward. All of that stuff is usable energy. And then they secure the consent, right? So they get people to participate willingly. And better still, gratefully. That's how it works. And that last one, consent that's the load-bearing piece. And I'm constantly talking about consent. And, we've been talking about it all season. And none of this works without our consent. None of it works without our energy. We are the ones who are supplying this entire system with our energy. And that's how they did it. That's how they do it, right? They capture the node. They overwrite the ceremony. They install repetition. They harvest the emotional energy, and they secure our consent to make it like a normal thing that we're supposed to do. Oh my gosh. It's crazy. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I just want to give you something documented here, like an actual documented piece. I'm not asking you to take this on feeling alone, although feeling is something that we should rely on a lot more than we've been told to do. But in the year 601, if we can trust the calendars, Pope Gregory I wrote to some abbot with instructions for the mission to England, and the letter is preserved in a book called Bede's Ecclesiastical History. So his instruction was that the pagan temples of the people, the English people at that time, should not be destroyed. So he told them to take the idols out, remove the idols, and sprinkle the buildings themselves with holy water, and then install altars. So the sites were to be kept in use. And his stated reasoning was that the people, seeing their familiar places preserved, would come more readily to the new worship that they wanted to install, right? Keep the site, but change what happens on it. Change who the devotion flows to, right? So instead of our natural relationship with the earth, right, our natural creational relationship with our mother planet, right, the devotion was to be harvested outward towards an external deity. This has happened all over the planet. That's just one example. And that's the whole operation, and it's written down as policy in the sender's own words. It's pretty amazing, huh? And it was carried out across Europe for centuries. Like I said, it was carried out all over the world in some form or other for as long as we've been around in this last cycle, you know. And that's why so many old churches in Britain and Ireland sit inside of earthworks or on top of springs or on mounds at the center of stone circles, you know, that predate them by thousands and thousands of years. Nobody was hiding this. This was the standard practice. And that's why when we go to places like that, we have this, wow, you know, this sense of it being a sacred place. But, because it's still live, but the energy is being used to feed the system instead of to feed us and the planet. We got to get our heads around this. There's good news here. Okay, there's good news, and I'm going to get to it. But the other piece that I want to look at is, so this is how empire sort of mechanically takes over, hijacks the natural energies, right? But we also have to look at what they move. Like, for example, obelisks. Rome took obelisks out of Egypt by the shipload, these red granite obelisks. And, the obelisk that's standing in the middle of St. Peter's Square was cut in Egypt. It was brought to Rome by Caligula in the 1st century and re-erected then at the Vatican in the 1500s. And Paris has one, London has one, New York has one, Washington, every one of those stones were cut in Egypt for a very specific place, extracted from that place, and replanted at a seat of imperial power. There's a reason for that. So if we ask the obvious question, like, why would empire go to all of that expense repeatedly across 2,000 years, if not more, to move enormous stones from one specific place to another specific place, right? Then in Australia, okay, this is a little bit different, but in Australia, the colonial administrations removed the original people from their country, right? Banned their ceremonies, broke the transmission of their language between the generations, right? They trained the younger generation to speak their own language. And, whatever else that did, and it did a great deal, obviously, it stopped the singing, to come back to the song lines. And the people who held particular song lines could no longer walk them or sing them. So the line was severed at the human end. I don't know about you, but if I start thinking too hard about this, it really breaks my heart. This has been done over and over and over again. We've got to remember how we've been severed from creation. So you see, the same operation is happening over and over again. This, sometimes there's no cathedral required. You just remove the singer from the land. And I want to talk about star forts briefly, because we're going to be talking about that with Indy on Monday. Star forts are part of this sort of grid network, right? The conventional account about star forts is that bastioned forts, what they call bastioned forts, were an engineering response to gunpowder artillery in the 15th and the 16th centuries. So, they created these angled bastions to eliminate blind spots in battle. And that account, I guess, is sound as far as it goes, but it doesn't fully account for, the sheer number of them on every continent and in places where there's no plausible artillery threat, and the consistency of the geometry across the cultures that were supposedly not in communication at that time. So I'm not going to resolve that today. That's Indy's kind of area, and she's spent years on this material, and it belongs to her to lay out properly, next week. But I'll just plant the question, I guess. What if the geometry was doing something besides stopping cannonballs, and what if their placement, the placement of these star forts, is the tell. For those of you who are coming to the retreat, the Star Fort Lyre and Gridwork Activation Retreat in Pensacola, you're going to see an actual star fort. Fort Pickens is a star fort. So you can look at it for yourself. And look, I want to go back and just be precise about my target here. I am talking about institutions, okay? I'm talking about the consciousness, the parasitical consciousness that has been operating through institutions. There have always been people praying in places, in captured nodes, whose whole heart has been praying inside of these buildings. And I have no doubt that, Source hears us when we are, when we're coming from a pure place, right? The architecture of extraction and the sincerity of the individual are two different things, obviously. And I made that same distinction earlier in the year when I was talking about the medical system and the doctors and the nurses inside the medical system, the good people inside the medical system. The system itself is extractive, but it doesn't mean that there aren't good people inside of it, right? And the same thing applies here. So I want to connect this back to the conversation that we've been having about Loosh all season, the Loosh economy, that Earth is used as a harvesting operation and human life force is the resource. The grid is the infrastructure of this looshing operation. That's the connection that I want you to make today. All right. A node concentrates charge. And if you put a large number of human beings on that node in a state of heightened emotion on a repeating schedule with their devotion pointed at an external authority, well, then you have built a very efficient loosh machine. Groups, big thousands of people getting together at stadiums for events, for concerts, right? Think about it. Look at aerial views of some of these places and what they are built to resemble if you have eyes to see. All right, these are extraction systems. And the emotional energy, it works with terror. It works with just as well with reverence and ecstasy and bliss. We covered this when we talked about worship as the delivery system. Bliss is harvestable. And that's why so much of this was built around genuinely beautiful architecture that inspires, and genuinely moving music that transports you. That's why it's confusing. Isn't it? It can be confusing because then, you think back to your childhood memories of, I have beautiful childhood memories of being in church at midnight mass on Christmas Eve. Oh my gosh, when I think about it now. But beautiful music and candles and good people and, I have fond memories of those times. When you realize that, there's more to it than just a nice community gathering, it gets confusing. It almost can stain, your memories of what you thought was innocently, was beautiful. But don't let it, because that confusion is part of it, Your innocence, your sincerity, your authenticity counts for something. It always does. So what we have to do now is realize the larger structure that we have been unwittingly a part of, the larger operation of looshing our life force energy that we have, most of us unwittingly, been a part of, and withdraw our consent from it. Because we don't need it, it needs us, right? So in the places where the worst has been done, at particular sites on particular dates with deliberate cruelty. That was never just about cruelty for its own sake. It was about what the cruelty produces at the node and what that production is used to hold in place. I'm going to leave it there. You know what I'm talking about. I'd rather not feed that field with any detail today. So here's what I actually came to say. This is going on a bit, but I'm also feeling my way through this subject as I am starting to get more awake around it and remember more. Everything that I've just described is a holding pattern. The lines are being kept in an inverted state. They have to be kept in an inverted state by that parasitical consciousness. And keeping them there takes continuous effort. The original architecture, if you will, I'm using that word loosely, but it survived all of it because source-made creation cannot be unmade by a parasite. It has to be overlaid. The lines of creation are source-made, those song lines. The most a parasitic consciousness can do is reverse the flow and hold that reversal in place. And holding it in place costs energy. It takes a lot of work to keep that inversion, to keep the distortion in place. Otherwise, creation would just revert to its natural state if it wasn't being held in place continuously. And that's why the system is so desperate for our participation. It's running an ongoing operation, and the bill comes due every single day. And who's paying the bill? We are. We are. With our attention, with our energy, with our consent. When we don't realize we're giving all of those things, that is taken for tacit consent. But it also means that this reversal itself can be reversed, that things can go back to how they were intended to operate if we start to realize what's actually going on. And this is the part that I find genuinely moving, and because of how creation is naturally, because the lines were always meant to be tended by human beings in relationship with the land, the restoration has to come through us. Not to us, through us. Nobody is going to come fix the grid on our behalf while we watch. There is, no fleet arriving to do this for us. It's ours to do. The architecture requires an embodied human being standing on the land in coherence, in conscious relationship, offering the current back to its original direction. We get to do that. That is what the system was always waiting for. I mean, not the system. I'm careful about the words I choose. We could say that the system of inversion is terrified of that happening. It's just terrified of us realizing the power that we have and saying, actually, I don't think we're going to play your game anymore. Bye. Then they're done. And this is what fractal compression serves as in this context. An infinite being compresses itself into one particular vessel, in one particular life, on this particular planet, in this particular spot, with feet on the ground, in this particular area. That compression is the qualification. It is the qualification to do this work. You cannot do this work from another dimension. It has to be done here. You have to be here in a body on the land. That's why we want you to come to the Star Fort Lyran Gridwork Activation Retreat in Pensacola in September. It has to be done here. But even if you don't come here for this retreat, you can do it where you are, because you are a node in the field. So in the retreat, here, we're going to be that's the work that India is leading. We're going to be here on the land. We're going to be physically going to the sites. We're going to be standing on the nodes. We're going to be doing the restoration work at the points where the inversion is held. And we're going to be turning the flow back to its original orientation. I'm going to be there as a team member. I'm going to be, I'll tell you more about my own part of it as we get closer, but Indy will explain the framework properly next week on Monday during our live. And what I want you to understand today is that this is the kind of work that it is. That this is reclamation work. And we are the only ones who can do it. And this was a job that we are, that we were always meant to do. It's part of our function here. You are not powerless. And this is how I know. 2 weeks ago, I said the world runs on us, literally, when we were doing the media fast, that the noise needs our attention to keep on existing. And when we withdraw our attention, it loses coherence. Same principle here at a planetary scale. If you look again at how much effort has gone into keeping us off the lines, the sites captured and the ceremonies being overwritten and the people removed from the country, the songs broken between the generations, the whole structure of the amnesia that we have been subjected to, so that human beings would stop knowing what they were standing on and what they were here for. You do not spend thousands of years suppressing something that doesn't work. The scale of the containment is the measure of our power. I've been saying that over and over again. And that's the read that I want you to take from all of this, is that every layer of interference is a piece of testimony to what we can do when we're not interfered with. And if the earth were not interfered with, her song lines would go back to their original state of flow. Hey, yeah. So, new earth is being born through people, through choices that we make, through our intention, through our bodies, through our feet on the ground. Through someone standing on a node and consciously offering the current back the way that it was meant to run. That is slow, unglamorous work, but it's already underway, and you can be part of it too. So I want to offer a little practice as we close here. It's a withdrawal of consent practice. We've done withdrawal of consent before in the context of media, in the context of systems of authority. So today I want to make it specific to this. So if you're in a place where you can do this, do it. If not, you can come back to it later. This is just a little practice. Get comfortable. Put both feet on the ground if you can, ideally on the actual earth. I'm up above the actual earth, so I can't do it right now, but if you happen to be outside, take your shoes off, put your feet on the ground, and you can put a hand in the center of your chest and breathe slowly for a few breaths. Just come back home. There's nothing special that you need to do. We were designed to come back home. There's no fancy meditation techniques that you need. You just have to relax. Relax back into yourself. Relax back into your own heart, into the depths of your heart. And then you can use your own words, or I'm going to give you some sentences. And you can just quietly repeat this to yourself. Okay, I am the sovereign authority in my own field. I withdraw my consent from every inversion of the original lines of creation. I withdraw my consent from every inversion of the original lines of creation, known and unknown to me, in this life and in every life that I have lived on this earth. I withdraw my energy from every structure built to reverse the flow. I withdraw my consent from every contract of participation I entered without full knowing. I return my devotion to Source within me, directly, without intermediary. I offer my life force back to Mother Earth in its original direction freely, as reciprocity. Only what is organic and source aligned may remain in my field. And just sit in that. There's nothing to perform here. You don't need to strain for any kind of sensation. Just notice. The natural way of life is simple. It's not convoluted or complex. So you can do this quietly and repeat it and treat it as like a stance that you take rather than a ceremony that you have to complete, you know. Every time you remember that, you're just remembering your stance, how you stand on the earth. You're aligning yourself with the natural, organic way of life. So may we remember that the lines beneath us are the veins of a living mother, and that they were never anyone's to own. Let's remember and recognize the inversion for what it is, and that is a condition that's being held at cost, and that we are feeding it. It depends on our ignorance. It depends on our disbelief. It depends on our consent to continue to operate in inversion. Let's understand that the current runs back through the same channel that it was turned in, and that it needs a human being standing there on the land to restore it back to its original flow. And may we stop waiting to be rescued. Always. This is such a deep program in us. May we stop waiting to be rescued. May we realize that we ourselves are nodes in this field. As fractal compressions, we have a great deal of power to reverse and restore what was inverted against us. Nobody else is going to come and save us. This is our work to do. It's not complicated. In fact, we were built to resolve this. Okay. Just a reminder, next week on Monday, at 3 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock Central Time, Indigo Angel and I are going to be doing a live together about grid work, about the Guardian Alliance material, about Starforts and about the Starfort Lyran Gridwork Activation Retreat that she is hosting here in Pensacola, Florida, September 18th to the 22nd. We're going to give you all the information that you need to join us at this retreat. We still have a few places left. It's capped at 30 people. Okay, but if you feel a calling, you should really come. Have a practical experience of this work that you can do. You don't have to have any superpowers to do it. You already have the superpowers. You're a human being. Come with your questions to our Live on Monday. And bring the ones you're embarrassed to ask. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your presence. Thanks for being open. And thanks for everything you're doing to bring forth the new earth. See you next time. See you on Monday and then on Tuesday next week. Bye for now.